In this video, I'm going to walk you through Chapter 11. So you should have already downloaded all of the images from the assignment page, and instead of opening them all at once, we're actually going to open just some of them because later on we're going to be doing an HDR and a Panorama, which when we're doing high processing files like this, it's best to not have anything else open. So let's start off with these first four images. I'm going to click on the first one and then hold down Shift and click on the last one to select all four and then drag them into Photoshop. Alright, so for this first image, let's go ahead and just open it. And I'm going to go ahead and go to Open as Object to open it as a smart object. Okay, so now that I have it open as a smart object, I'm going to go ahead and start on the first page. And it's going to be to create a lens flare effect. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new blank layer by clicking on the Create a New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, which is right over here. So let's click here. There's your new layer. And then we're going to change it to black. There's a couple ways to do this. For this one, they are telling us to press D to set your foreground color to black, which this is your foreground color, it's black now, and then hit Option, Delete to fill it with black. Another way to do this is going to Edit, Fill, Black, and hitting OK. Now that we have this, we're going to go to the Filter menu, go to Render, and choose Lens Flare. Here's the Filter menu. Let's go down to Render and click on Lens Flare. Now we have a couple different options. You can choose different lens for different types of lens flares. So pick whichever one you like. I'm going to go ahead and pick this one. You can also play with the brightness here. And you can pick whatever you want. Go ahead and hit OK. And so now that we've done this, we're going to change the blend mode from normal to screen. So here's where the blend modes are. Here's where the blend modes are. And if we go to screen, what's happening is that it's going to not show the darkest areas of this layer and just show the brightest areas. So if we go to screen, now it's blending with screen mode instead. I can click on my move tool and move it to where I want it to be. And if you see an edge, like you see right here, let me zoom in a bit. If you see a slight edge, you can just go ahead and add a layer mask. Bring up your brush tool by hitting B and paint with black in that area. You want to make sure you're using that your brush has no hardness to it, so it's completely feathered, so that it feathers as you're going around. Okay, looking good. I'm not seeing an edge down here. All right, so there's your lens flare. Let's move on. Now we're going to create a spotlight effect. And there's a couple different ways. This is similar to how I showed you how to make a custom vignette. You can do it that way by making a black layer and changing it up there. For this one, it's telling us to do a camera raw filter. Now because I opened this as an object, I can just double click on this right here and it's going to open back up in camera raw. So now I'm going to go over to my Radial Filter and I'm going to click and drag where I want this to be. You can also spin it around by coming over to the sides. Once you get this little double arrowhead, that's to spin it around. You can also make it larger this way or that way. I'm going to take the exposure down. And to do this spotlight effect, there's a hard feather, so not very much of a feather. And if you want to see what it looks like without the lines, you can just switch back to your panels real quick. And that's what it would look like. So let's go back. I'm going to make it a little bit softer. Oops. To engage it again, you just have to click on this pin right here in the middle. And once it turns red, you're engaging it again. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Okay, there we go. Let's hit OK. Now they do have another method on here with lighting effects. And for some reason, I was trying to figure out why, but my lighting effects, if we go to Filter and then Render, you can see I have some things that aren't popping up. I'm not really sure why. I think it might have to do with my graphics card that was replaced. So that's a bit of an issue. But luckily, there's more than one way to do things in Photoshop, so I can do the Camera Raw filter instead. Let's go to the next page. Create a soft focus background look. So for this, we're going to go back to the filters, and we're going to go to the blur gallery. You're going to go to Iris Blur. And with this, you can again move it around, spin it how you want it, make it larger or smaller. We also have effects right over here, so you can make it much more blurrier or not as blurry. Okay, so now that we're done and playing with the effects that you want, you can play with this stuff as well. It's up to you. You can go ahead and hit OK. Awesome, all done. So I'm going to go ahead and take my screenshot, and I'm going to save this. And when I hit save, it's going to come up with the box for the first time because it wants to save this as a PSD. That's fine. I'm just going to add my name to this and click save. Click OK. All right, looking good. Let's go ahead and close this. Once it's done saving, you can see that there was a bar down here and it said save up here. Now it's done. Let's close this down. All right, so let's do the create a tilt shift effect. Now I'm going to make a copy of this because we're actually going to do another blur effect on the same image, and so I want to be able to turn off that other layer if necessary. So I'm going to hit Command J. Sorry, I need to make sure I'm in Photoshop. I click here and now hit Command J, and now I have this other layer. I'm going to name it Tilt Shift. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm going to come up here to the filter. I'm going to go to Blur Gallery, and make sure you're not clicking this Blur Gallery, because this Blur Gallery will just give you the exact same effects that you did for the last Blur Gallery. So that's not what we want. We want to create a different one. We're going to use Tilt Shift instead. Before we were using Iris Blur. So let's do Tilt Shift. And now we can come to these lines and play where the blur is actually going to happen. So these, so the lines that are not dotted is where the area that's going to be in focus. And then this is like where the feather is going to be for the dotted line. So you can put that where you want. And pull this up. All right, and now we have that tilt shift effect. Go ahead and come up here and click OK. Now let's go to the next page. Get a dreamy focus. And now I'm going to come back to my background layer and make some more copies of this. I'm not making a copy of the tilt shift layer because that'll just make a copy where there's all that blur still happening. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off, go to my background layer. Okay, in the layers panel, duplicate the background layer by clicking and dragging it onto the create a new layer icon at the bottom of the panel. So that's another way to duplicate layers. There's Command J. You can also click and drag it to the new layer icon, and it'll make you a new layer. I'm going to rename this one Dreamy Focus. Okay, now let's go under the filter menu under blur and choose Gaussian Blur. So filter menu, blur, Gaussian Blur. When the filter appears, enter 20 pixels and click OK. Now go back to your layers panel and near the top right, lower the opacity to 20. This gives you a soft focus effect. So here's the opacity right over here. And you can drag this where you want. You can also just click where the numbers are and enter what you want. Okay, so now we have a soft focus look. Sweet. Now that we have all that done, we can go ahead and take our screenshot. And let's go ahead and save. And click Save here. Close this one down, and let's go to the next page. Okay, create a desaturated skin look. Now there's many ways to do this, of course. Okay, so first we're going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to hit Command J. And we're going to open up the Camera Raw filter. All right, let's go. It says to go to the basic panel and drag your vibrance down. Okay, looks good. Let's go ahead and click OK. And now we're going to add a layer mask to this by clicking on the layer mask icon right here. And we're going to change it to all black, Command I. And now we're going to brush over just the skin area. So let me zoom in here, get my brush up. And if I want to reveal, right now everything is hidden. If I want to reveal what's on this layer, then I need to be painting in white. So there's two ways that I can change quickly to white. I can either click this double arrow or hit X. All right, now I can come in here and desaturate the skin. And if it seems like it's a bit too much, all we got to do is come back to this layer and take the opacity down a bit. All right, looking good. I'm going to make my panel a little bit bigger by clicking and dragging over here so I can rename this. I'm going to name it Desat Skin. All right. Let's go to the next page. Okay, so I'm going to turn off this layer. I'm going to come back to my background layer and duplicate it twice. I'm going to hit Command J twice. Right? And now I'm going to desaturate this middle layer completely. Let's see. By doing Command Shift U, Command Shift and U. And it still looks like it's completely colored. Why is that? Because we have this completely colored layer right on top. So if we turn that off, we can now see that we have the black and white layer. So let's turn this one back on. Click on this layer with top layer with the color. And we're going to change the blending mode to soft light. Okay, so now we have more of a somewhat desaturated look. And now if we wanted to apply basically this look to just the skin, we could take this layer, hold down Shift and click on the second layer and then merge them. You can do this by going to Command E or right clicking and going to merge layers. Okay, so now if we want to apply it just to the skin, we already have a mask for that here. So let's go ahead and go to Alt, hold down your Option key, the Alt Option key, and click on this and drag it, and it's making a copy of that mask. If you let go, there it is. You now have that copy there. And now you can kind of see the differences in the two different methods. I actually prefer this one right here. So let's go ahead and rename this one. This is High Contrast Portrait. And we're all done with that. Now, if you want to see what it looks like without the mask, to have it all on there, you can just right click on the mask and go to disable. And now you see there's this red X, and we have just we have the image without the mask applied. You can see the differences in the two methods there too. Again, I prefer this one. All right, all done with that. Take your screenshot, go to File, Save. Okay, let's close this one down and move on to the next page. All right, create the look of fall in a landscape shot. Okay, so for this, we're gonna go to the image menu. We're gonna go to mode and change to lab color. Now that we've changed to lab color, we're gonna go to the image menu again and choose apply image. Let's go to image menu and apply image. When the dialog appears, choose B from the channel menu. And then for the blending mode, we're going to change it to overlay. Okay, click OK. And now we're going to change our color mode back to RGB. All right, and that's it for this one. Let's go ahead and rename this Fall Look. Okay, let's go ahead and take your screenshot, and let's go to File, Save. Okay, we can go ahead and close this down, and now it's time to go and try our hand at some HDR toning. So we're going to come up here to the File menu. We're going to go to Automate, and we're going to go to Merge to Hdr Pro. So now we need to go ahead and find our files for our Hdr Pro. So let's go to Browse, and we're going to select these 3 files. So you can click on the first one, hold down Shift, and click on the third one here, and then hit Open. Okay, looking good. Let's go ahead and hit OK. So it's going to take a moment. You can see that I have this little, my pointer, my arrow is thinking. So just let it think for a moment while it's pulling all this together. So now that we're in the HDR dialog box, we can go ahead and play with some different stuff. There's edge glow, strength of the edge glow, gamma, exposure, detail, we have even more advanced options here, like taking the shadows up. I'm going to take the highlights down a bit. And maybe take down the saturation for a black and whitish look. So there's all kinds of fun stuff to play with here. You can also go to different presets. And I don't think, oh no, we still have the Scott 5. So here's the Scott 5 preset. But I want you guys to play with this and do what you want with it. So let's go ahead and go back to the default. And play with it as you want. Once you've gotten to a place that you're happy, click OK. Let it open up, and there's your HDR image. Now you should have already watched the video on HDR and read over my lecture with HDR to understand what the whole point of HDR, aka high dynamic range, is. If you didn't, make sure to go back and see why this is a really great way to create photos in really high contrast situations. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and go to Save. And I'm going to call this Redondo HDR Practice. And oh, don't forget to take your screenshot. And if you want, you're more than welcome to play around with some other effects and add some stuff in here if you want. This could be a fun place to actually do some adding some color to different areas to create a whole different thing, whole different image. So feel free to play around with this if you want. This is the basics of the HDR. So let's go ahead and close this, and let's move on to the next page. All right, so let's go back to our files, and we're going to open up this image. It's 10 through 12, black and white, and create a reflection and paint effect. All right, so first I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this image, Command J, and now I'm going to go up to my Camera Raw filter. So let's go to Filter, not this Camera Raw. That's just going to apply the settings from the last time you were in there. We want to apply new settings. So let's go to Camera Raw filter here, and we're going to come up here to Profile and click on Black Monochrome. Now, if you notice right now, I have a color mixer down here. Once I change the profile to monochrome, it changes to a black and white mixer. So now you can play with how dark or light these different colors are going to be. If you're noticing right now, as I'm doing the reds, it looks like there's some reds in this building, so I can make those building areas darker, or I can make them lighter. I'm going to turn this off for a moment. Okay. And go ahead and play with these to make it however you think looks best. All right, that's looking good. Let's see. Now you can do other settings. We can come back up here and play with, let's say, contrast, if you want to make it more contrasty. There's other things we can do, like we had practiced before. Like, let's say we want to make the sky darker. We can use our graduated filter. And if I hold down Shift, it'll stay completely straight. And I can pull the sky down. Make it darker there. If I click on it right up here, it'll go back to my panels. And once you're happy and you've played around with some of this stuff, go ahead and click OK. All right, now we have our black and white version. So let's go ahead and rename this. I'm going to name it B and W Camera Raw. Okay, looking good. Let's move on. All right, so now we're going to create a reflection. I'm going to go ahead and turn this layer off for a second. And I'm going to go to my background layer and hit Command J to make a new layer. And now I am going to get my rectangular marquee tool, which is right up here. And I'm going to select this whole city area. And you can do the whole thing. We're really going to flip it and put it down here. So here's my city area. I'm going to hit Command J, and that's going to make a layer of just the selected area. So that could be really helpful. So if I turn off these two layers, you can see that layer is now just this city area. All right, let me turn this layer back on here. I'm going to hit Command T to go into Free Transform. Another way to get there is to go to Edit and here to Free Transform. Okay, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to Flip Vertical. And now it's just turn this upside down. You can hit Return or you can hit this little check mark to keep this. And now I'm going to get my Move tool and drag it on down here. And as I'm dragging, if I hold Shift, it'll keep it in place in the way I'm dragging it. All right, now that I've lined it up there, I have my reflection. Sweet. Now I personally think we can make this look a little bit more like a reflection, like with the water ripples coming through and such. So let's play with some blend modes for a second, see which works better. Looks like maybe darken or multiply. Looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and click there. And now I'm going to come up here to my filter and go to my motion blur. And now we can add a bit of a blur to this area so it looks a little bit more like maybe a long exposure reflection. And I'm just going to do it very slight and click OK. And now I think I'm just going to take the opacity down just a tad so we can see some of those little bit of water reflections coming through. All right, nice. So that's a little bit of extra that they didn't go through in the book. All right, let's move on to the next one. Creating a painterly effect. And actually, before I move on with that, I am going to go ahead and pull these two together. I'm going to merge these two together. So I'm going to click on this first one, hold down Shift, click on the second layer, right click, and go to Merge Layers. And I'm going to rename this Reflection. All right, so I think I'm going to do my painterly effect to this reflection, to the image with the reflection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, hit Command J, and now I have a copy of my reflection. Let's go ahead and rename this Painterly. And now we're going to come up to the Filter menu, go to Stylize, and choose Oil Paint. So let's come up here to the, come up here to the Filter menu. Stylize. And it looks like my oil paint is not there. Okay, so I think this might be another issue with my specific graphics card hardware, unfortunately. So I'm going to figure out another way to do this. Let's see. Let's go up to Filter Gallery. Now, if you guys do have the option to do the oil paint, go ahead and do the oil paint assignment on there. But if you don't, if you're having an issue like I am, you can come up here to the Filter Gallery and play with some of the other filters up here. So here I have Artistic. I'm going to try this Paint Daubs effect. And we can change the brush size. And we can change the sharpness. So I'm going to go with a little bit less of a sharpness and a smaller brush size for this. You can feel free to play with this however you want. You can also make multiple layers for the filter gallery here. If I hit the plus sign, I'm going to turn off this Paint Daubs underneath, and I'm going to change this to Palette Knife to see how that looks. Let's take the stroke size down, and maybe I'm going to take the softness up just a bit. And so you can see some of the different paint effects you can have. You can also have them both on and have both effects going on at the same time. So I think I'm going to stick with my paint daubs, and I'm going to click OK. All right, so there is my painterly effect. Now that we're done with this, let's go ahead and take your screenshot. Go to File, Save, and add your last name. All right, let's go ahead and close this down. I'm going to go to the next page to go over to Make a Panorama. Okay, so again, we're going to go to File, Automate, and this time we're going to go to Photo Merge. And again, we want to select the files we want for our panorama. So let's hit Browse. Okay, so here are our images for our panorama. Let's click the first one, hold down Shift, and click the sixth one. Now that they're all selected, click Open. Go ahead and leave it on Auto. You can leave it on Blend Images Together. And I'm going to click on the Vignette Removal and Geometric Distortion Correction. So if there were any issues with the lens, whether there was a vignette, a darkening of the corners basically, or geometric distortion, if it was like, let's say, a wide angle lens or something, it will correct that while it's blending these images together. Let's click OK. And this is probably going to take a little while. It usually does. So just hang back, check some social medias or emails or something, and let Photoshop do its work. So, a couple things I want to talk about for a moment. First of all, you're probably asking, why do you need to create a panorama in Photoshop if most phones these days have a panorama function? Well, your phones are probably smaller resolution. Now, that's not true of all phones, so some phones have gotten way better. But let's say you wanted to do a giant wall print. If you try to use your phone and the resolution wasn't very good, that panorama might not print very large. Remember when we talked about resolution? You need to have at least 300 pixels per inch. So if you have a small resolution panorama file, it's not going to print very well if it's large. So it's something really important to keep in mind, and why we still make panoramas this way. And you will also be doing a panorama next week. So this is a little bit of a practice where I've given you the photos. I'm hoping you guys are going to be able to get out and take your own panorama photos next week. So just a heads up. Okay, so you can see we have the images in our different layers, and it matched them all up, and you can see it added its own layer mask to each layer just to show you the specific parts that it used from each image. Now you can also see that we have this weird weird thing going on here with the horizon where it's not completely straight. So I need to fix this. What I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to merge these layers. Right now, if I come down here to this bottom area and go to Document Sizes, you can see that this is 142 megabyte / 591 megabyte. So 591 is how big it is with all these different layers. 142 is how big it'll be if I go ahead and flatten all the layers together. So this is a time where flattening is a good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and come to Flatten Image. And now that's turned it down, that's taken it down to one layer, and you can see our document size is reduced quite significantly. So I'm going to click on the little lock to unlock it. And now I am going to attempt to make this straight by using some transform tools. So let me make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to pull down a couple guides just to kind of help my eye out to see what is straight. And remember, with guides, you just click on the ruler and drag it down. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Transform, Free Transform, Command T. And I'm going to click on this little warp symbol right here. And now I can move some of this stuff around. So I'm going to move this down here. I'm going to move this up here so you can click in the image, and you can also use these. I'm going to move this down. And it looks like we need to move this to the side a bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and hit the check mark. And it's going to do the transform for us. Now to get rid of these guides, we can do a couple things. We can hit the command and semicolon. We'll take them away. We'll leave them there, but they will not be viewable. If you want to clear them all together, you can just go to View and go to Clear Guides. Okay, so now we still have some issues. We have these gaps around here, and there's a couple ways we can deal with this. We can crop them out. We can also try using Content Aware Fill. So let's give it a try and see how it does. I'm going to come up here to my Magic Wand tool. So it's going to be under your Quick Selection tool. If I click and hold there, I can come down to my Magic Wand tool. You can also hit Shift W until it comes up. And I'm going to click in this white space here. Next, I'm going to go to Select, and I'm going to go to Modify. I want to expand my selection just slightly so that it is overlapping and we don't have, because if we do this without doing this, there might be a little bit of a white line between this area and the photo. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 5 and click OK. So now the selection has expanded slightly. I'm going to zoom in so you can see. So actually, let me take it a step back. So with the Magic Wand tool, it was selected right up to the edge of this area. But once I expanded it by 5 pixels to include this, so that there isn't any little gaps in there. Let's zoom out again. And I'm going to come up here to Edit, Fill. And this time I'm going to choose Content Aware. Let's click OK. And let Photoshop do its magic. It might take a moment. Okay, and it did not do a good job with this. So there's a couple things we can do. We can either try it again. We can keep what we have and maybe try to use the clone stamp tool. Or we might just decide to crop it out. So before I make that decision, I'm going to go ahead and take a step back. I'm going to try to see how it does with the sky. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. You can also go to the Select menu and hit Deselect here. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Magic Wand tool, click once there. I'm going to come back up here to Select, Modify, Expand by 5 pixels. Okay. And let's go to Edit, Fill. And this is probably going to take a little bit longer because it is a larger area. Okay, it looks like it worked kind of for some parts, but the edge is still pretty funky. So this might be one of those cases where you're just not going to get a good thing going. Let's give it one more try and see if it does a better job. All right, well, it just still didn't do that great of a job, so I think what I'm going to end up doing is just cropping it. Sometimes this works really, really great, but the more complicated that the image is, the less success it seems to have. So this time it didn't work out. That's okay. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, and I'm going to pull up my crop tool, and I'm going to crop in these edges. Hide this for a second. Okay, and once I get to a crop that I like, I can go ahead and hit the check mark. Okay, not too shabby, looking pretty good. And that's your panorama practice. Let's go ahead and save this. And take your screenshot. Oh, before I forgot, before I close this, I needed to make sure I had my history open. I do want to see that you did at least try to do the fill, okay? Even if it doesn't work out great for you, hey, maybe it will. I don't know. But I still want to see that you at least tried it out. So let's go ahead and take the screenshot again, and we're good to go. All right, let's close this down and move on. Okay, so let's open up our next image, which is 14 spin wheels. And actually, at this point, we can go ahead and open the rest of these. So there's 14. I'm going to hold down Shift and click on 15, 16, 18, and 17. And then drag and drop it here. All right. I'm going to switch back to my Move tool for a moment and get my spin wheels image up. Let's make a new copy by hitting Command J or clicking and dragging to the new layer icon. And now let's go back up to our filter, blur gallery, spin blur. All right. Let's move this down here. I want to go ahead and get the center in the center of there. I do want to cover the entire wheel though. Let's see. Okay. And now we can also change the blur angle and how much it is spinning. And I need to get this more in the middle. All right, that's looking good. I'm going to leave it about there. I hit OK, and we're going to do this again for the other wheel. And I'm going to put in the same. I had used 14. Get it in the middle here, and let's move it in. I do want it to be covering, I want it to be in the middle, but covering the edge of the wheel too, so let's make it a little bit larger. Okay. And one more, we can barely see this here, but let's really sell the effect, right? Let's go to Filter, Blur Gallery, Spin Blur, and do it again, right over here. All right. And let's hit OK. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and add a layer mask to this. And we're going to get our brush tool up by hitting B. I want to be painting in black. So right now I'm painting in white. Let's switch that to black. And we do want a pretty hard brush for this. I'm going to try, 64%. Let's see how that does. And brush over the car area. We want the blur only on the tires. We don't want it on the car. We don't want it on the ground. All right, looking good. Oops, went over the tire a little bit. Okay, looking good. All right. So, and if you want to check to see where you have brushed over, you can hit the backslash button so you can see a little bit better. So I should probably, whoops, get this fender a little bit better here. It's not really noticeable in this black area, but I'm just going to go over it anyways. Okay, there we go. Hit the backslash button again to take that away. And now we have our spinning wheels. You can turn it on and off and see how you made them spin. Good job. All right. So let's make sure we have our history panel open. Stretch it down if you need to. And let's move this so we can see the whole thing and take your screenshot. Okay, save. And we're done with this one. All right, let's close that down and move on to the next. All right, so here we're going to add a cast shadow to this bottle of wine. And you can do this to text as well. And you do have to have your object on a separate layer. So right now I have my bottle of wine on its own layer. I could turn it on and off. And I have my background on its own layer. Okay, so what are we doing with this? We're going to create a drop shadow layer style. So we're going to do this by, there's a couple ways to get to your layer styles. You can either double click on the edge here of a layer, or you can also come up here to FX and go there. So let's go to drop shadow here. And with drop shadows, you can play with all kinds of different options. So what the angle is that it's going to, and oh, it looks like my computer's having a hard time processing what's going on. Let's hit OK real quick. Okay, so it's just going to the side. For some reason it was taking a sec. If you need to get back into your effect, you'll notice now that we have our effects right here as part of the layer, and I can double click on the drop shadow and it'll bring me back up to it. Okay, so I'm going to actually go maybe this way. Well, it doesn't really matter for this part, but you can do distance. You can play with the spread, how hard or soft the edge is, the size. But we're going to keep it, we're going to keep the size pretty low. We're going to keep the spread, let's see. Actually, I'm going to make my size a little bit bigger to give it a little bit of an edge feather. All right, that's looking fine. So let's go ahead and click OK. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to separate the drop shadow from this layer. So let's go up to the layer menu, layer style, and choose create layer. So here we have the layer menu, layer style, and create layer is right here. All right, so let's go ahead and just click OK. If that comes up, no problem. So now I have the drop shadow on its own right there. So now I can give it more of a look like it's on a table by transforming it. Let's go ahead and hit Command T to go to Free Transform. All right, so make sure that we need to make sure we are on the correct layer. So make sure you're on the drop shadow layer and then hit Command T to free transform. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make it look like it's similar to this photo here where it's on a table. So I'm going to line it up actually. I'm going to pull this up. I'm going to use the arrow keys a little bit to get it just right. Then I'm going to hold down the Command key and click on this center little box here so that I can make it come out to the side. And actually, I am noticing that this bottle has two light sources. So you can see this white stripe that's really bright here. That means that when it was photographed, there was a light that was brightest right there. But you see there's also another white stripe here. That means there's another light coming from this side that was also bright. So that means that there should be two shadows, and this one will probably be lighter than this other one because there's this bright light hitting it too. So let's go ahead and keep this, or better yet, let's go ahead and undo. Let's hit this no button here. I'm going to take this shadow and I'm going to duplicate it, Command J. Then I'm going to select both of them and then get them in the center with my move tool. So hit M for your move tool. Oops, I'm sorry, V for your move tool. Pull it up. I'm going to move it over here so it's right behind there. Okay, so here's this first one here. Let's go ahead and hit Command T to free transform. I'm going to hit the Command button, hold down the Command button while I click on here and move this to the side. And maybe I'm going to tap the right arrow key a little bit to pull the bottom right underneath there. I'm going to hit return. And then I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to do the same thing but put it on the opposite side. So Command T, hold down Command as I move this to the side here. And it looks like the lights on the bottle are equal distance, are kind of equally going. So let's just go ahead and try to keep it equal to this one here and move it over just a bit. Then you can hit return to keep it. Now let's just change up the opacity a bit. So because this light that's coming from the left is brighter, this is probably going to be a darker shadow. And this light is going to be slightly hitting this shadow, so it's going to lighten that shadow a bit. So this shadow will be darker, this shadow will be lighter. Let's go ahead and come to this side and take the opacity down a bit. Okay, and now I'm going to click on this layer here to change this opacity. And I do want it to be lighter. All right, and so now we have this look of having, we have both of the shadows going. All right, so that's something to think about more as you get deeper into Photoshop and what we're doing, especially when it comes to light and shadow effects. We have to make sure we're looking at the object and what the light is looking like on the object. Alrighty, looking good. So we can go ahead and take our screenshot and let's go ahead and save. Oh, and because it was already a PSD, it just saved over the PSD file I had. I need to keep this file unchanged. So I'm actually going to take a step back so that you can see it says save here. And I am going to take this back down real quick. Oops, wrong one. Let's go here. All right, and this time I'm going to go to File, Save As. And now I can save it as a different file name and add my name here and hit save. Okay. Yay, looking good. Let's go ahead and close this down and move on to the next. All right. So next we're going to do a cross-processing effect. Before I start, I'm going to make a new layer for this. I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to hit Command J. And we're going to go to the camera raw filter. Now here with the camera raw filter, I can come down to split toning, and we're going to basically add yellows to the highlights, and we're going to add blues to the shadows. So the first set he's telling us is to have the highlights at 70, the saturation at 25, shadows to 200, saturation at 25. All right, so here's the hue. So I'm going to add 70, and that takes us to the yellows. And we're not seeing any change yet because the saturation hasn't changed for this color. So let's put in 25, and now we have yellow in all of the light areas. Now let's go to the shadows and add in 200, and that gives us this blue color. And again, for the saturation, we're going to go to 25, and now we have this cross-processed look. He gives a couple of more combinations to use. Feel free to play with those. I'm going to hit OK, and now I have my cross-process look. So let's rename this to cross-process. Okay, and hit return. Sweet. Done and done. All right, so now we're going to add a texture to our image. So there's a couple different ways to do this. You can select, so let's go to our texture image here, and this is actually a really great reason to photograph textures when you're out taking pictures of random things. If you see a cool texture somewhere, take a picture of it. You never know when you're going to need it for Photoshop. So to do the book version, it wants us to select the whole thing by hitting Control A. Command A to select all, and then you can copy and paste by either doing Command C to copy, Command V to paste. You can also come up here to edit, copy, and then come over here to your image and click Command V to paste. Another way to do this is you can actually come over here. I'm going to deselect. You can see there's a little dotted lines happening. I'm going to deselect by hitting Command D. I'm going to have my move tool up. I'm going to click and drag this up to where my other file is, and once my other file comes up, I'm going to drag towards the middle and let go. And now I've also added the layer here. We only need one, so I just wanted to show you two different ways to do that. I'm going to hit delete, and if you can tell that it doesn't quite look the same. Why is that? It's because we're only seeing a little bit of the texture. If I look down here, I had changed this information to be document dimensions. Document dimensions tell me that it's 14 inches by 9 inches as 72 ppi. This image over here is 13 by 10 inches at 300 ppi. So even though we have 13 by 10 inches and the other one was like 14 by 9, the reality is that because there's 300 pixels per inch on this, it has way more information and is a lot larger than this one, which only has 72 pixels per inch. So I want to use the entire texture, so I need to make this texture smaller. How can I do that? Free transform. So you can either go to Command T, or you can go to Edit, Free Transform. And now I have this here, but I can't see the other side, the other areas, so I can move it in. So let's go ahead and zoom out, Command minus, until you can see the bounding box. So this is how big that texture file is compared to our rocker girl. So let's go ahead and click on the corner and bring it in and click the check mark. Let's zoom back in by hitting Command plus a couple times. And now that we have our texture here, let's play with the blend modes. You can come through and look at the different blend modes, but they're telling you that there's also another trick over here. We can hit Shift plus to try different blend modes. So let's come back here and hit Shift plus, and it is cycling through all of the blend modes. So you can see what they're all doing. And remember, if there's a blend mode you like, but maybe it's a bit too strong or intense, we can always take the opacity down on the layer. So I'm liking this overlay, so I'm going to leave it at this. And you can play with the opacity as well if you want. But I like this big old grunge style, so that's looking good. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next page. And the last one here is create a duotone look. We had already done this before using Lightroom. So we're going to try this out again and using the split toning again. So let's go ahead and come back to our background layer, hit Command J to make a new one. Let's double click on here and put Duotone. And let's turn off these two layers here. All right, let's go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And first we want to go ahead and change this to black and white. So let's come up here and go to Monochrome. And if you wanted to play with the black and white mixer at this point, you could as well. So her lips are red. You can see I can make them dark or light, as well as her base and some of her skin tone. So go ahead and play with these sliders and get them just how you like it. This is totally up to you. You'll notice that some sliders don't do much. That's because there's not a lot of that color in there. There's hardly any purples, hardly any magentas. So you can just leave those in the middle. Okay, let's go down to split toning. And let's see what they're saying we should do. All right, we're going to drag the shadow saturation slider over to 20. And then we're going to try for a warm brown look. All right, so let's go over here, saturation 20. And 35 to 42. So let's just drag this over. And you can make your own decision on what looks best to you. And you can really do any color you like. You don't have to stick with the brown if you want. But that's traditional for the quote-unquote duotone look. Okay, looking good. Go ahead and hit OK. And that's done. Let's see how this looks with our texture on top of it. That's kind of cool. And then, of course, there's the cross process you can add back in as well. All right, so we're done with this one. Make sure that you have your history panel open. Stretch it down so you can see as much as possible. I don't need to see it all, but I would like to see as much as possible of what you did. And now you're going to take your screenshot and go ahead and save your image. And hit save. All right, and that's it for this chapter. Yay, fun stuff.